persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Gotham never sleeps. It hums, it flickers, it sells you neon and nightmares while two men fight over what those nightmares should sound like. One is old Hollywood steel, a jawline cut from Texas limestone, a presence honed in courtrooms, war rooms, and dusty one-horse towns. The other is a human spark, quicksilver grin, rubber band limbs, the kind of energy that fills every empty space, whether you want it or not. On the set of Batman Forever, under towers of cardboard skyscrapers and rivers of studio light, Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey were meant to be allies in spectacle. Instead, they became opposite poles in a storm only one of them wanted to weather. It wasn't a fist fight, no shattered props, just a single line, dropped in a quiet corner of a restaurant the night before shooting. I cannot sanction your buffoonery. The words landed like a gavel. Final. Cold. And from that moment on, every shared scene felt like a duel, one fighting for precision, the other for chaos. Gotham has always had its villains. This time, they weren't in costume. Before the neon and the noise, there was the nod. That professional tilt of the chin that says, I see you, I know what you can do. Tommy Lee Jones had just ridden the shockwave of an Oscar, controlled voltage. A man who could hold a frame still by refusing to blink. Jim Carrey had detonated 3 box office miracles in 1 year. Elastic voltage. A man who could bend a frame until it laughed. Joel Schumacher wanted a carnival. Pop delirium. A Gotham that glowed like wet candy under 1,000 lamps. The studio wanted something else, too. A global event that could sell tickets, toys, and a mood. In that bright agenda, Two-Face and the Riddler were twin engines built to spin the ride faster. One coin. One question mark. One film that had to juggle gravity and helium without dropping either. At the first table read, you could feel the split screen. Tommy was all lines etched in granite pace. Pause. Pressure. He carved the beats like a lawyer arguing to a tired jury. Jim was a live wire on a cold night, bigger, faster, louder, then suddenly small and sincere, like he had hidden a blue note inside the punchline. Different temples, different hymns. Same altar. On the soundstage, the city rose in cardboard and steel. Assistants floated, wardrobe racks squeaked. The call sheet promised order while the lighting grid promised chaos. Between setups, the veteran carried a private weather system overcast, precise, wary of storms. The comet moved in streaks, handshakes, riffs on the handshakes, a kinetic kindness that could also read as hubris if you worship control. No one calls it a feud at the beginning. They call it process. They call it tone. They call it the usual friction you get when one man trusts the scalpel and the other trusts the spark. But a film is a pressure cooker. The lid hums. The steam finds the hairline cracks. And somewhere between the director's candy-colored vision and the studio's toy math, 2 philosophies began to scrape. The scrape will find its sound soon enough, and it will happen far from set, under soft restaurant lighting, with one sentence that feels like a slammed door.
It just raises too many questions.
It started in a booth at a quiet Los Angeles restaurant, the kind where the silverware is heavy and the servers know not to rush you. Jim Carrey walked in late, riding the afterburn of another day in the Riddler suit. The green spandex still itched in his memory, the makeup smell still clung to his skin. He spotted Tommy Lee Jones in the corner, halfway through a steak, that stoic face carved into its usual lines of concentration. Carrey was wired, as always. He slid into the booth like a kid crashing a family dinner, cracked a joke to the waiter, then turned to his co-star with that signature open-mouthed grin. Jones looked up, smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the polite smile of a man weighing his words. Then came the line, flat as a verdict. I cannot sanction your buffoonery. No lead-in, no softening, just the kind of phrasing you'd expect in a court transcript, not between castmates on a blockbuster. Carrey laughed, thinking maybe it was a deadpan bit. It wasn't. Jones's eyes stayed locked, the air thick with a message beneath the words. Your energy is a liability to my craft. The tension had been seeded long before that night. Jones was a method man, even if he never called it that. He believed in control, in rehearsal, in holding the scene steady so the audience could lean in. Carrey thrived in disruption. He believed a scene was alive, only if it could surprise him as much as it surprised the audience. On set, their differences played out in micro-expressions and missed cues. Jones would land a line with surgical precision, only to watch Carrey detonate a new improv that bent the scene sideways. Carrey saw it as giving the audience more, Jones saw it as diluting the signal. The crew started noticing the geography of their interactions. Jones stayed in his trailer between takes. Carrey worked the set like a street performer, riffing with the grips, making the makeup team laugh until their hands shook. The director tried to bridge the gap, but tone is harder to direct than blocking. The dinner sealed it. That one sentence became the invisible line down the middle of the production. From then on, every shared scene carried an extra weight, not in the script, but in the space between them. Next came the moment when private disapproval turned into public rupture, and the whole set felt the shift. On a set like Batman Forever, nothing stays private for long. Between the glare of the arc lights and the quiet hum of gossip, small tensions find a way to grow teeth. After the dinner incident, Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey still shared scenes, but they no longer shared oxygen. The crew began to feel it in the air, like two weather systems circling the same city, waiting for the collision. It happened during a night shoot. Gotham's skyline glowed under a painted moon, steam curling from the vents, extras locked in their marks. Jones was in full, Two-Face armor, half-scarred prosthetics, tailored suit split down the middle. Carrey was a walking question mark in neon green, every inch buzzing with cartoon menace. The scene called for Banter Jones's menace countering Carrey's manic riddles. Take one. Carrey improvised a new line, bending his voice into a cartoonish shriek before collapsing into a mock faint. The crew laughed. Schumacher laughed. Jones did not. Take two. Jones tightened his delivery, clamping down on any opening for Carrey to wander off script. Carrey doubled down, turning every pause into an opportunity for a pratfall or a new punchline. The rhythm of the scene buckled. The assistant director called cut. Jones removed his coin from his pocket, flipping it once, staring at it like it might give him an answer. Then he muttered not to Carrey, but loud enough for the boom mic to catch. "This isn't acting, this is noise." It landed with the force of a thrown bottle. The grips froze. Carrey's smile thinned. From that night on, the production split into camps. Some crew members gravitated toward Jones's controlled gravitas. Others were charmed by Carrey's unrelenting energy. The director tried diplomacy, pairing them in fewer off-script moments, reshaping blocking to keep them from stepping on each other's timing. But the damage was done. Entertainment reporters sniffed out the tension. Rumors started to leak anonymous whispers about on-set frost and clashing styles. The studio shut it down, but they couldn't shut down the body language. In press photos, Jones's smile looked like a closed door. Carrey's grin was wide, but no longer reached his eyes. The final straw would come later, not under the hot lights of Gotham, but in the quieter corridors of Hollywood, when career paths forked in opposite directions and the silence became permanent. When Batman Forever wrapped in 1995, the two men walked away from the same set into completely different climates. For Tommy Lee Jones, the role of Two-Face was a detour, a brightly colored anomaly in a career defined by lawmen, generals, and hard-eyed realists. He returned to the comfort zone of courtroom dramas and political thrillers, films where dialogue was ammunition and the frame belonged to stillness. For Jim Carrey, the Riddler was another leap on an already vertical climb. He went straight from Gotham's green glow into the surreal playground of the cable guy, then back into broad comedy hits that kept his name inked in box office gold. Carrey's style, the chaos, the improvisation, the kinetic flood became not just tolerated but expected. But in Hollywood, style isn't just performance, it's currency, and the industry remembered the whispers from Batman Forever. Casting directors knew Jones was a fortress, dependable, disciplined, unshakable. They also knew he had no patience for what he considered indulgence. Carrey, on the other hand, was a wildfire magnetic, profitable but hard to contain. There were offers that might have brought them back together. Scripts with room for both gravitas and lunacy. Projects where their chemistry, even friction, could have been weaponized into brilliance. None of them happened. Sometimes it was scheduling. Sometimes the studio backed away. Sometimes the unspoken never again was enough to kill the conversation before it began. The irony was that both men were evolving in parallel. Jones took roles with more texture, occasionally stepping outside his granite persona. Carrey dipped into drama, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon revealing depth beneath the elastic mask. Critics noticed, audiences applauded. And yet, in interviews, any mention of their shared Gotham chapter was met with polite brevity or an artful dodge. Hollywood loves a reunion, it loves a redemption arc, but between Jones and Carrey, the lines had already been drawn in permanent ink. There was no public spat, no magazine cover declaring a truce, just a quiet absence, the kind that speaks louder than headlines. That absence would be tested years later, when nostalgia circled back and the idea of revisiting Gotham or at least sharing the same room again was floated. What happened next would prove that some doors, once closed, stay locked. Hollywood is a small town wearing a very large mask. If you work long enough, you run into everyone again in green rooms, on award show stages, at charity galas, where the champagne is warm and the smiles are colder. It was the early 2000s when the chance came. A high-profile award circuit was in full swing, and Jim Carrey was writing critical acclaim for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Tommy Lee Jones had just earned praise for The Missing. Different genres, different tones, but both men were orbiting the same constellation again. The setting was a pre-awards dinner, the kind hosted in hotel ballrooms with too much carpet and too many cameras waiting outside. Carrey arrived first, shaking hands, disarming the room with his elastic warmth. Jones entered later, straight-backed, face unreadable except for the polite compression of his mouth. People who knew the Batman Forever history watched from the edges. Maybe the years had softened the edges, they thought. Maybe two professionals could bury a sentence spoken in another decade. Carrey, ever the optimist, decided to try. He crossed the room, weaving through tuxedos and sequins, and greeted Jones with an open hand and a line about how long it had been. Jones shook the hand, nodded, and then, in a voice that was civil but unyielding, moved the conversation elsewhere to the weather, the event, anything but the shared past. It wasn't hostility. It was something heavier, indifference. The kind of indifference that doesn't come from forgetting, but from deciding the memory isn't worth revisiting. In its own way, it hurt more than the original line at that restaurant years before. Carrey didn't push. He smiled, made a quip about the salmon, and drifted back into the crowd. For the rest of the night, they orbited the same space without touching, two satellites locked in separate trajectories. In the press coverage that followed, there was no mention of the encounter, no photo of them together. Just two names in the same guest list, as if the universe had tried to set the stage for reconciliation, and both men had chosen to play different scripts. That was the last credible attempt at closing the gap. After that, their careers and their lives moved further apart, until all that remained of their collision was a single sentence, preserved in Hollywood lore like a fossil under glass. What followed was the ripple effect, how that fracture lived on in memory, in reputation, and in the mythology of what happens when two acting titans refuse to share the same weather. In the years that followed, Batman Forever became a strange artifact in both men's filmographies. For Tommy Lee Jones, it was the outlier, a garish comic book role tucked between sober portraits of authority. For Jim Carrey, it was one more jewel in the crown of his 90-second domination, a performance that split audiences between those who saw genius and those who saw excess. The friction between them never became tabloid fodder in the way modern celebrity feuds do. There were no public jabs, no tell-all interviews dripping with venom. But in Hollywood's Whisper network, the story of "I cannot sanction your buffoonery" became shorthand, an insider's reference to the clash between discipline and chaos, between the old guard and the new wave. Casting directors remembered. So did producers. Jones's name remained a seal of gravitas, but also a reminder that he valued control above camaraderie. Carrey's reputation as a live wire was part of his charm, but also part of why certain co-stars, especially those with Jones's temperament, thought twice before signing on. Fans, meanwhile, mythologized the encounter. On internet forums and at comic conventions, the dinner story resurfaced like an urban legend. Some painted Jones as the cranky veteran who couldn't handle Carrey's brilliance. Others framed Carrey as the reckless clown who disrespected a master craftsman. The truth, as always, lives somewhere between the punchlines and the poker faces. As superhero films evolved into billion-dollar universes, Batman Forever stood as a neon relic of a different era. Interviews marking its anniversaries inevitably circled back to the question, could these two men ever share a screen again? Carrey would smile, sidestep, sometimes call Jones a great actor. Jones would acknowledge the film, praise the director, and glide past the Riddler-shaped elephant in the room. The absence became part of the narrative. And in Hollywood, absence can echo louder than presence. Their paths never crossed again on set, and so the tension remained preserved like an unfinished chord that still vibrates decades after it was struck. The lesson wasn't in who was right or wrong. It was in how two world-class actors, each brilliant in his own realm, could find themselves not in open war, but in a quiet, enduring stalemate. Some conflicts don't explode, they calcify. They settle into the grain of memory, becoming part of the way two people navigate the world. For Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey, the clash wasn't about talent. It wasn't even about ego in the tabloid sense. It was about the invisible contract actors sign with each other when they share a scene. I will meet you where you are. Jones's artistry came from control, every pause weighed, every gesture trimmed to purpose. Carrey's came from surrender, throwing himself into the chaos and trusting that something alive would crawl out. In another life, those differences might have complemented each other. Here, they collided, not in the heat of a shouting match, but in the cool precision of a single, unforgettable sentence. And maybe that's why it stuck, because real life isn't always built like a third-act reconciliation. Sometimes the curtain falls with two characters still on opposite sides of the stage, each certain they did what they had to do. The question isn't whether they could have worked it out, the question is whether they needed to. Gotham moved on. Hollywood moved on. The audience, too, but not entirely. Somewhere in the glow of that neon city, in the gap between the coin flip and the punchline, there's a scene we'll never see, and maybe that's why we keep looking for it. If you've made it this far, you've seen more than just a behind-the-scenes anecdote. You've seen two acting worlds collide, one built on precision, the other on pure kinetic fire. And that's the magic of Hollywood feuds. They're rarely about the headline, they're about the people, the craft, and the quiet moments that never make it into the press kit. So now it's your turn. Which side of Gotham's coin are you on? Do you think Tommy Lee Jones was protecting the scene from chaos, or was Jim Carrey breathing life into a script that needed it? Or maybe, just maybe, both were right in their own way. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your favorite Jones or Carrey performances. And if you want more stories from the shadowy corners of Hollywood, the rivalries, the reconciliations that never happened, and the fractures still hiding in plain sight, make sure you subscribe. Because in this town, the next great story isn't in the script yet. It's happening right now, somewhere between the spotlight and the shadows. And you'll want to be here when the curtain lifts. Two legends, one city, and a single line that split Gotham in two.